This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. Boring. Boring.
Okay, you gotta do it. Don't tell us what we're gonna feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're gonna feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're gonna feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
The return of the sausages. And that's the subject today here on Lembit Öpik Live. Good day to you. Thank you very much for joining me on Unprecedented TV, the home of free speech, where we kill the spin, find the facts and tell it like it is as best we can. Well, as always, we try to bring something topical. And the topical subject today is the inexperience that seems to be infecting European politics. You may or may not have noticed the recent travails of a former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, who has just been found guilty of the criminal charge of basically getting money in a way that he shouldn't have. And that's from the late Colonel Gaddafi, who was in charge of Libya. Well, this has come back to haunt him after years and years of him being chased for impropriety. He's going to appeal. Maybe he'll succeed, maybe he won't. But for now, he will be held in custody. So however it turns out for him in the long run, he's essentially in prison. And I put it to you that Sarkozy is suffering from the same malaise that many other politicians in Europe are experiencing. Although Sarkozy had a fairly long experience in politics, there was something wrong about the way he did it. I met him once, and when I introduce my guest, I'll share that rather lurid experience with you. But we also have the likes of Keir Starmer, a regular subject of controversy and often a subject of ridicule, who came in 2015, I think it was 2015, became leader of his party, became prime minister, and has been messing up ever since. And who's his best pal? No, not Jeffrey Epstein. That's Keir Starmer's friend's best pal. That's Peter Mandelson I'm talking about there. I'm talking about Macron. Emmanuel Macron, the current president of France, who also seems to not have the wherewithal to do the job. I've been in politics for over 40 years now, and I still learn. I made mistakes, certainly did in 2010 when I lost my seat. But I'd already been involved with the political system for over a quarter of a century. These people come in later on in life without the experience and the basics. They didn't do the hard graft on local authorities. They didn't sit in interminable local branch meetings and all that stuff. I put it to you, that's the problem. That we've got a bunch of amateurs who thought, how hard can politics be? It's very hard. It's not a game. But these do play act on it as if it is. And when you're faced with real professionals like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in China, you're going to lose. And that's the subject today. Maybe it's just me. I'd like to hear your views. By the way, if you like what we're producing, please subscribe to Unprecedented TV on YouTube. Easy to find, and it costs you nothing. Unprecedented TV on YouTube. And you'll see what we hope is a fairly professional offering. But today, I want to introduce somebody who has been on before a number of times. And he is certainly a professional when it comes to talking and common sense. Is Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. Good to see you again, Marcus. How are you?
Thank you, Lembit. It's a pleasure to be back on, and I'm particularly looking forward to this topic.
Why?
Because I think that anyone, even with just an ounce of sense, realizes that something is very, very wrong in the Western world. And the telltale sign of that are the politicians. To say that politicians are amateur is simply an understatement. They are absolutely useless in every sense of the word. And as I said, the vast majority of people are aware that something is wrong, and all they need do is turn on their television or look on their mobile phone, and you see the face of Starmer, or you see the face of Cooper, or you see this face of Macron, And you know that things are very, very dark at the moment.
Yeah, this is the issue. This is the issue I've got. Now, some of those people I was in Parliament with. So I finished 15 years ago. Doesn't feel like it, but it was 15 years ago. And some of them were there then. So they've got at least 15 years of experience, at least 20 years, in fact. And yet they just don't seem to have learned anything. Yvette Cooper, who berated the country for daring to suggest there was any ethnic question about the genealogy of the scum who murdered children in Southport. Then we discovered his name was Axel Ruder Cabana. It's not a very common Welsh name. And then she berated us for saying there's any terrorist connection. And lo and behold, there's a terrorist connection. This woman's just making terrible, fundamental mistakes, which led to riots all over the country. And this is the point, Marcus. I don't get how we got here. We've got 70 million people thereabouts in the UK, and this 650 is the best we've got.
I think, first of all, Lembit, we need to acknowledge that when it comes to corruption, this is something which has existed throughout human history. Wherever you find human beings, you will find, regrettably, corruption. In no way am I making allowances for corruption. But again, for many people, if there is a chance to increase their financial standing, then they will take it. But that said, if we take Britain, Britain was once respected in all four corners of the world. One of the reasons being it was respected was on account of its politicians. Politicians, I'm not going to say obvious ones such as Winston Churchill, but people like Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan, Harold Wilson, Michael Foot, Dennis Healey, Norman Tebbit, and so on and so on. Regardless of what you thought of their politics, these were men of real stature, and in many cases of immense stature. Take Anthony Eden, for example, who was first of all Foreign Secretary and then Prime Minister. He was fluent in 5 languages, including Arabic and Russian. Compare and contrast Eden to the incumbent Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. How many languages does she speak? Or compare Eden to her predecessor, David Lammy. You can see straight away that there is no comparison. Listen to the spoken English of Anthony Eden. Consider Eden's written English. Then listen to the spoken English of Cooper and Lammy. On top of that, consider Lammy and Cooper's knowledge, and I use the word knowledge in a very loose way, their knowledge of history. It is absolutely lamentable. So you asked the question, Lembit, how did we arrive at this situation? Well, clearly, the situation began to deteriorate following the coming to power of Tony Blair. And I'm not saying 1997 when Blair became Prime Minister, but I'm saying when he became leader of the Labour Party in July of 1994, following the death of John Smith. Because after Blair became leader, he changed the rules regarding how constituency Labour parties or local Labour branches elected their candidates. In essence, local Labour parties were no longer able to elect people whom Blair and the rest of his henchmen considered to be undesirables. So people who who held views such as Tony Benn or Michael Foot. So what happened was that inevitably the people who were elected at the 1997 general election for the Labour Party were overwhelmingly Blairites.
Well, people like these. Don't interrupt you. This is a blast from the past. From around 1997, we got Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson, and they actually looked like characters who would be playing Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson a film. Because
Yeah.
there's something about their appearance which just doesn't look like the hard-bitten, heavy-duty politicians of the past.
No, it doesn't. It's almost as if a door was open to them, so to speak. But what I would say about Tony Blair, whilst he is a very, very dark entity, nonetheless, he is exceptionally gifted.
Mm-hmm.
He once had an ability to communicate with practically anyone in the country. Now, ever since the criminal, unprovoked and murderous invasion of Iraq, Blair's reputation has been absolutely decimated, and rightly so. But Blair certainly stood out from other MPs in the Labour Party. So from the 1997 general election, things have only got worse. What we have observed in the House of Commons since 1997 is overwhelmingly MPs, men and women, who practically have no experience of the real world. They came straight from university, or they came straight from Labour Party head office or Conservative Party head office. They are not intelligent. They are not devoted to Britain. They are not devoted to the British people. They are devoted to themselves. They're devoted to their bank accounts. They're devoted to their status, and they are devoted to networking. And that is one of the main reasons which I have for many years now cited in my argument that Britain is dead. I do not believe that Britain is in serious trouble, that Britain is lawless. No, Britain is dead. The British people are not dead, and a new Britain can be created. We can resurrect the good aspects of the Britain that you were born into, Lembit, that I was born into, but quite frankly, that Britain is long gone. So the British people have an opportunity now to create something new.
Now, you mentioned the lack of robustness, I think, intellectual and experiential in Parliament. I agree. Recently, I did a show exploring the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey. I used to share an office with him, and he devoted his entire election campaign to rubbish like this. This is the kind of thing he was doing. He seemed to think that getting headlines of any sort was a good idea. I would maybe have agreed with him had I not had my own experience of life. And then I realized that the public aren't quite as forgiving as I thought. He is the leader. And then he's been praised because they got 72 members of parliament for the Lib Dems, the highest number that's ever been achieved. But he'd have got a lot more if he hadn't been doing this kind of nonsense. So we've got clowns and amateurs in parliament. I'm interested to know what you mean by Britain is dead. What do you mean by that?
Culturally and spiritually, Britain is dead. So, for example, the government recently made the argument to a court, specifically the Home Office made an argument that the rights of illegal immigrants are more important than the rights of Britons. That is abnormal, Lembit. That is not the way that a normal country functions. It is in human nature, sadly, that we can become conditioned to anything, no matter how awful something is, no matter how abnormal something is. Over time, and if nothing is done about it, we start to accept it. We might not like it, but we become conditioned to it. Well, quite frankly, people around the world are viewing Britain with absolute shock and absolute disgust. And to make it worse, a so-called judge who should never have been given that case in the first place, but then the judiciary is neither free nor independent in Britain, agreed with the Home Office's argument that illegal immigrants have more rights than British people. Go to Latin America and say that and see what the response would be. Go to Russia and say that. Go to Africa and say that. Go to China and say that. Go to the Middle East and say that. And see what the response of people would be. I'm afraid that Britain is dead. Is it normal that there are thousands upon thousands of children who are victims of grooming gangs? And in some cases, those victims have been denigrated.
Yeah.
Is anything going to be done about it? Let's be honest about it, Lembit. We all know that a few people might be sacrificed by the British establishment as a way of saying that the wheel of justice turns in Britain. But the reality is that the people at the very heart of that unforgivable, deplorable, diabolical episode will never be held to account. I also warned a few years ago that the British establishment, now that the vast majority of Britons are awake to the evil which exists in Britain, that the British establishment could carry out a tactical retreat whereby they start to throw people under the bus, so to speak, as a way of saying the system was penetrated by rotten human beings. And we apologize for that, but we are getting to grips with the situation and we are ensuring that people will be arrested, charged, and put before a court of law. Now we're starting to see that tactical retreat. British people must not be tricked by this, because a tactical retreat is not a defeat. The British establishment must be defeated. Only then can we create a new Britain for Britons. Britons.
Before we go further, interesting you should say that. I want to remind viewers that Claire Dyer, one of our presenters, is also a huge activist, very much trying to reclaim the streets, at some risk to herself, I have to say. Her program, Dire Consequences, touches on some of the subjects as well. Just have a look at this. And she shares your angst, Claire Dyer. And almost week in, week out, she has stories. One example, Epilim, which apparently is a drug which has been given to pregnant women, and it can cause tremendous damage to the unborn child. And one of her fairly regular guests chronicles the fact that her child will never have a full and normal life because of the damage the drug did. And there's a lot of love in that family, but there's an awful lot of heartache, and she can't get anywhere with it because the politicians don't really care. And then we have somebody else who's literally run over by a member of Transport for London's team, and they lied about it. And you just start thinking that not only do we have the problem of amateur politicians, but we have a state which is willing to subjugate the very citizens you were talking about a few minutes ago in the interests of their self-preservation or the preservation of these putative rights of people who came here illegally in the first place, Marcus.
There is no accountability for those who serve the crown. And I put a lot of emphasis on that, who serve the crown. Politicians, civil servants, and police officers, for example, do not take an oath to the country or to the people or to a constitution. We don't have a constitution in Britain. Indeed, you cannot have a constitution in a kingdom. They take an oath to an individual the monarch. As a result of that, these people, despite what they are complicit in, are not held to account because they are serving the state. They are serving the monarch. And that is why we will never see high-level officials in government arrested, for example, for the lockdowns, which constituted one of the greatest crimes against humanity in human history. We will never see the arrest of high-level officials in government for the police arresting people who have an opinion. They haven't committed a crime. They're not suspected of committing a crime. They have expressed an opinion. An opinion. Again, they haven't murdered anyone. They haven't raped anyone. They haven't threatened to murder anyone. They haven't threatened to rape anyone. They have expressed an opinion. And yet, no one is arrested. None whatsoever.
We've got the problem, extending it out to Europe. We've got the problem, in my view, that the whole of Europe is being contaminated by these low-quality politicians. You mentioned Winston Churchill before. Just imagine if the current crop of politicians had been in charge in 1939, 1942. Jumping to the present day, we've got Merz in Germany, Macron in France, Starmer in the United Kingdom, all little friends there. And because they're so superficial, I suggest that side stories, like were they involved in taking cocaine on a train, become a big matter of conversation. I don't actually really care what they did. I'd legalize and regulate all drugs anyway. But it's because they're so lightweight, it's more interesting to talk about whether they were snorting cocaine than what they were actually talking about in that room. And I'm very frustrated by this because you're looking at three people there who collectively represent about 200 million people and some of the largest economies in the world. And that's the best we can do. I actually despair to an extent that we've got ourselves such a poor crop. And I think you were right by what you said before, Marcus. They go to college, they go to work for politicians, they become politicians, and then they mess it up. They think somehow that you can do a job which requires a ton of life experience without any.
This is a fascinating point that you make, Lembit. And because we don't have hours upon hours to discuss it, I will have to go from A to Z without going in between, looking at the other letters in the alphabet. But suffice to say that something has gone diabolically wrong in the Western world, and it began on the surface. It became clear that something was wrong from the late 1990s onwards, again after Blair came to power. However, is it the case that the problems weren't there before? Well, I would argue in the case of Britain, the changes began under the surface, but they began in the 1960s. I would say in the late 1960s. So, for example, with the feminist movement at that time, women who were calling for the pill, calling for the right to have an abortion at any time. Now, there's something inherently wrong about women who take joy in abortion. And yet that's what we saw. We also saw in the late 1960s, and this is documented, primary source evidence exists to document this, that attacks began on the churches in Britain. So to cut a long story short, I do not believe that Britain, England before it, has ever been truly democratic. I believe that the heart of English power and then British power has always rested with the monarch. I believe a constitutional monarchy is a facade. I do not believe that a monarch a few hundred years ago decided for the sake of democracy he would give all his powers to a prime minister and a parliament. No, no leader voluntarily gives up power. But I believe that the British establishment at the time understood that in order to maintain its power, it had to be seen as evolving, because there were a lot of problems emerging on continental Europe, for example, in the 1700s. And the British establishment took note of that. But I believe that the British establishment, the British ruling elite, of which the monarchy is at the heart of, decided after 1945 that it no longer needed the British people. And I will cite this example, Lembit, and I really wish your audience would look into this. Again, don't take my word for it. It is true what I'm going to say, but research it for yourselves. Ian Smith, the leader of Rhodesia, who performed a miracle, an economic miracle in Rhodesia, was a great man, a great politician. By the mid-late 1960s, he had formed the conclusion, Lembit, that the British state, including the Queen, had turned on the British people. And he, of course, he was talking about in the context of Rhodesia, but the white people in Rhodesia were almost exclusively of British origin. The way that the British state betrayed Rhodesia and the British people in Rhodesia is extremely important. You cannot understand what is happening in Britain today if you do not, for example, look into what happened to Ian Smith and Rhodesia in the 1960s. For example, under Harold Wilson, Ted Heath, then again Harold Wilson, then James Callaghan, and then Thatcher. Essentially, the British state betrayed their own people. The British state, as Ian Smith said, played a pivotal role in bringing Mugabe to power. Indeed, the British state supplied weapons to Mugabe's terrorists, who were slaughtering many members of black tribes in Rhodesia. So what we see happening today in Britain, yes, it became obvious that something was wrong under Blair, but the problems were there before that.
Just before you go further, Ian Smith, I'm interested in what you say about Ian Smith, and better not go too far down the history path. But Ian Smith was a character who was always associated with, and they always say it the wrong way, declaring UDI, which means declaring the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. So from a syntax point of view, it's wrong, but everyone always says declaring UDI, and he was regarded as a pariah. I was always told, even when I was young, there he is, in fact, that he was a bad person. You're saying he was a good one.
Ian Smith has been completely denigrated by the British state. Even now, when he's in his grave, the British state and its tentacles, for example, politicians and mainstream journalists, continue to spit on him, as I said, in his grave. Yet, primary source evidence tells a very different story about Ian Smith. Ian Smith believed in evolution as opposed to revolution, which means he did not object to one day being a prime minister or president of Rhodesia being black. He did not object to that. But what he said is that people who understand Africa realize that because there are many tribes and they live a very different life to people in cities, they cannot be expected to take the reins of power overnight. And of course, many people in what is today Zimbabwe will testify to that. Many black people, after Ian Smith died, expressed great sadness. There are many black people in Zimbabwe today who wish that they could bring back, as they say, old Smithy to power. So when the British state and its tentacles denigrate someone because of their views, that is, in my mind, extremely telling and extremely suspicious. I won't go any further on Ian Smith, but I say to people, read his memoirs or autobiography, however you categorize it as, and see what he says.
I've not very much time left, maybe about a bit less than 10 minutes. I want to come to the present day again. Now, you're talking about Ian Smith as a heavyweight. It's very interesting because that's not what I thought about Ian Smith until this conversation. I got work to do as well. I've got some homework there, Marcus. Let's come to the present day. We've got Emmanuel Macron, who seems to spend more time walking around with his wife, trying to prove that she's a woman, than talking about things that really matter. Or at least he's reported as that. And I put it to you, I don't care whether she's a woman or not. It's interesting gossip, but it doesn't really make any difference to my life. I'm not going to marry her. But once again, it's because these people are so superficial that you can't get past the gossip because no one really cares about the lightweight substance. And before him, we had Nicolas Sarkozy. Nicolas Sarkozy, he's in a lot of trouble. That's not his wife. That's Gaddafi there. But he's been accused and convicted recently of criminally getting funds from Gaddafi. It's a rather slightly vague accusation. He was cleared of a lot of the charges, but apparently he's in trouble for getting money. Now, I looked into Sarkozy today before we started the show, and I initially thought he was a rank amateur, but he'd actually been in politics for quite a long time. But nevertheless, he's in trouble. So it seems to me that with Sarkozy being done, I met him. I promised to tell a story about him, and I will in a second. Being done for this, it looks like the rot set in France as well. My story is I met Sarkozy, I think it was in the year 2006, and I thought he was reprehensibly unpleasant. I thought he was arrogant, self-satisfied, totally unable to read the room, all kinds of things I didn't like about him. So I'm not sorry that he's gone down. But it seems to me, Marcus, that the irony of Tony Blair trying to be big friends, not Tony Blair, sorry, that's from the past, from Keir Starmer, trying to be big friends with Emmanuel Macron, it more or less benchmarks them both as very poor politicians.
There is a reason why Macron pursues other avenues which are not related to his job. There is a reason why Starmer does exactly the same thing. And their equivalents in Scandinavia and in Germany and so on throughout Europe. And indeed, it extends to Australia and New Zealand. It is because these people are not running the country or their countries. They are puppets. Does anyone really believe that Starmer can run a country? Does anyone really believe that Cooper or Lammy formulated British foreign policy? For God's sake, they are as thick as two short planks. They are useful idiots. They are puppets. If you take the Foreign Office, who determines British foreign policy there? The permanent undersecretary. And the permanent undersecretary is drawn from from the heart of the British establishment.
Here's a
Lammy
story.
has gone from the Foreign Office. Now Cooper is there. What does Cooper know about international relations? What did Lammy know about international relations?
Well, obviously, pretty much nothing. He was a disaster area as foreign minister. This picture here reminds us of a story which has virtually vanished. Did Keir Starmer's voice coach really count as a COVID key worker? After all the claims and moaning and whinging by him and Labour that the Conservatives hadn't locked down enough, strangely, Keir Starmer himself invited a voice coach during the lockdown to visit him in mysterious circumstances, let me say. And this is the kind of double speak that people don't like. On top of that, I'll just throw this one in. We know Keir Starmer loved to go, I'm not sure he's doing it so much now, but loved to go to Ukraine to get photographs with his mate, Volodymyr Zelensky. the amateur hour president of Ukraine. Let's not forget about this. This is him. This is Vladimir Zelensky doing the job he actually was trained for, being a comedian. In this picture, he was playing the piano with his personal member and 3 other men. And now he's the president of Ukraine. There's a pattern here, I think. And it seems to me it's hardly surprising that rather more heavyweight politicians like, oh, that's Andy Burnham there in the picture, are now openly saying they're being asked to stand against him. Burnham, I have a lot of time for. I know him well, and I thought he was always a straight shooter when it came to his politics, honest. I'm wondering if you think there's any hope for Labour, any hope for the country if we change the politicians at the top of the old parties.
Again, this is a very, very, very big question to answer. In short, no, I don't. I have immense respect for Rupert Lowe. I have immense respect for reform councillors. I have grave leadership of reform at Westminster. I believe that Sunak, who was another imbecile, his job was to destroy the Conservative Party, pave the way for Starmer. Starmer's job is to implement things that no normal human being would want to do. And by doing that, I believe that Starmer will pave the way for Farage. I suspect that next year there could be a snap general election and that reform will surge to power. And whilst I believe that 99.9% of reform voters, members are good people who love Britain, who are proud of being British, again, I suspect that the agenda will be, to a large extent, continued.
So
yes,
wait a minute. So before we go away from this, how would Andy Burnham fit into this? Because Andy Burnham is quite obviously, this is my opinion, but to me, obviously a more credible politician than Keir Starmer. If Andy Burnham gets through, and I can't see anyone to stop him, then that would slightly stymie the plan, wouldn't it?
Well, maybe the British establishment is preparing to dump Starmer. I mean, that is a possibility. Britain is not a democracy. Britain is a tyranny and a kleptocracy. All of these politicians, they are all puppets. So perhaps, yes, the British establishment is now paving the way for Burnham to become leader. But again, how different is he going to be? And this applies to all countries in the Western world. The Western world is under attack. The Western world is under siege. Western civilization is being dismantled, not being dismantled by the puppets, the useful idiots. Well, they've been given their instructions. You have to get to the root of the problem. You have to get to the heart of power. That is not a conspiracy theory. Again, does someone really believe that Starmer is running Britain?
Well,
does
he said himself.
really believe that Zelensky is running Ukraine?
He said himself that he'd rather, this is Keir Starmer, he'd rather be in Davos than in Westminster. That's the Prime Minister. He'd rather be with his unelected rich buddies in the World Economic Forum than in the semi-democratic Westminster. We know from his own words that what you're saying is correct. Just a word about Farage, you're not that persuaded?
A lot of what Nigel Farage says and has been saying for well over 25 years now, I support. But he has said that he would not deport each and every illegal immigrant. He has not said that he will halt immigration. I
think
find
he has,
that
though.
very concerning.
He made a speech. He said, no ifs, no buts. If you come in here illegally, you get deported and you never get the chance to apply. He did say that a few weeks ago.
Yes, but what about the 200,000 who are already here illegally?
Like, he's changed. He just said that he would remove the indefinite leave to remain, ILR, and he was quite. He made a speech about this a couple of weeks ago. I think he has tightened up on that.
If he has, I welcome that. But at the same time, I want a politician who's going to do a lot more than deport illegal immigrants. And that is why I prefer Rupert Lowe. We have to halt immigration. I would argue, Lembit, that legal immigration is an even bigger problem than illegal immigration. So all immigration, legal and illegal, of course, has to be halted and has to be reversed. We have to put the British people first. And if that means deporting vast numbers of people, humanely, of course, respectfully, then it needs to be done. Because I want to see the Indian government put India first. I want to see the Pakistani government put Pakistan first, and so on and so on. And yes, I want a British government to put Britain first.
And just a last question for you then, and it's a fairly big one. Do you think that the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, will make it to 2029?
No, I don't. I believe that the British establishment is conducting already a tactical retreat. I believe in order to, so to speak, throw red meat to the masses, they will call a snap general election, knowing that that Farage will come to power. And then the question is, will the agenda be completely scrapped and reversed in Britain? As I said, I have grave reservations about that.
Thanks so much. Always interesting to speak with you, Marcus. Don't be a stranger. We'll get you back. Of course, this program will be in the archive together with all the others, so you can compare our predictions with the facts. We share our opinions as well as the information as best we can establish it. But you have your say. If you like what you're seeing here on Unprecedented TV, please subscribe. And we welcome our increasing number of viewers in the United States as well. And great news for you. If you've been watching Lembit Öpik live, which is my show, which I tend to do in the mornings in terms of UK time, we are going to be launching an entire dedicated array of programs for the United States as well. More of that to follow. For now, though, let me conclude with two thoughts of my own. Number one, Keir Starmer is not competent to run Britain. And I think that he signed his own political death warrant when he said he'd rather be in Davos than in Westminster. After that, how could anyone take him seriously? He doesn't want to be in Parliament so much as being with the World Economic Forum. Then why do you want to be the Prime Minister? The second thing is he hangs around with other amateurs such as Macron and Zelensky, and it shows. We're a long way from the days of Winston Churchill, and maybe there's hope again. But one thing I would say is for sure, Britain's in trouble because the people who are serving us in government don't know how to govern. And they've forgotten that they work for us. Please be part of the vanguard of free speech. Please subscribe to Unprecedented TV on YouTube. Also, you can follow me on X at Lembit Öpik. But more than anything, keep thinking for yourself. Happy to have a conversation with you. If you go into X, I'll be chatting there. I'm Lembit Öpik. This is Unprecedented TV, the home of free speech. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a great day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages.